by coming out with a press release, it provided a lot of fear and anxiety that was really unnecessary. Pregnant women already have enough things to worry about without this being thrown at them, and it's really a false thing. I'm a physician. You shouldn't take tax or legal advice from me. I wouldn't take medical advice from a lawyer or politician.
Educate, inform, inspire. The Dan Parsons Show, a podcast that lifts up instead of tearing down.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to the Dan Parsons Show. I'm your host, Dan Parsons. Hey, before I introduce today's guest, I just wanted to take a moment to thank everyone who came out to our live show last week. What a great time meeting all of you, having conversations, enjoying an adult beverage, and the conversations on stage were just outstanding with our guests. We'll have the full episode up very soon. It's taking a little while. Believe me, it's going to be worth the wait. In the meantime, you can enjoy a little teaser that is now airing on our socials and over on our YouTube page. So check that out and stay tuned for the full episode. Okay, on to today's show with our favorite physician, Dr. Bob Rauner, on President Trump's new policy on autism. Enjoy. Hey, it is my pleasure to welcome back to the show Dr. Bob Rauner. Dr. Rauner is the president at Partnership for Healthy Lincoln, and he also serves as president of our Lincoln Public School Board. Dr. Bob, welcome back.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You know, I told my producer, it's kind of like the well-known meteorologist for the Weather Channel, Jim Cantori. You know, it's never a good sign when Jim Cantori shows up in your community. You know, something bad is about to happen. So I kind of feeling that that's when I invite Dr. Bob on to talk to our audience, there's usually something bad going on. So
It reminds me of my daughter when she was young. My wife and I are both physicians, and she said, "Dad, why do they say, an apple a day keeps the doctor away? Why do they want to keep you and mom away?"
it doesn't pay the bills if mom and dad are both on the sidelines. Well, Bob, thank you for taking time. I know you're a busy person, and but we've come to rely on your medical advice and your analysis of what's going on in the country. So I think the big topic that I wanted to chat about today, President Donald Trump just recently claimed that using the common painkiller, acetaminophen, or the more common brand name Tylenol, during pregnancy is fueling the rise in autism diagnosis. He then even went on to suggest that pregnant women should tough it out rather than use this painkiller if they experience fever or pain. So, you know, this announcement, it caused alarm and confusion worldwide. So I guess maybe my first question, Bob, is there scientific evidence to back up this claim that acetaminophen used during pregnancy is the cause of the rise of autism in our country?
I'd say at this point, are there some studies showing a link? Yes. Are they showing what we call causation? I would say not enough at this point. And so there's a common phrase in epidemiology that correlation does not equal causation.
Mm-hmm.
So there are studies that correlate the use of Tylenol with increased rates of autism. Although it'd be kind of like a common way to explain this is that the incident the consumption of ice cream is correlated with sunburns. It doesn't mean that ice cream causes sunburns. It's just that ice cream and sunburns both tend to happen more in the summer.
Mm-hmm.
And so it doesn't mean that one causes the other. So are there studies showing that there seem to be higher rates? Yes. However, the way to sort this out is to do something called a randomized controlled trial. And the
Okay.
problem is it would be really, really, really difficult to try to do that in pregnancy for all kinds of reasons. And we can go into those if you want to. So they find other ways to try to control for that. And probably the best study came out last year was a Swedish study where they studied close to 2.5 million Swedish births because Sweden has a registry of all births essentially, including things like did mom take Tylenol or was she prescribed Tylenol? And what they did to try to sort out things was they actually were able to use two siblings, like if one child has autism, the next child or the child before did not. Was there a difference in Tylenol use? And there wasn't actually. That when you controlled for the siblings, all those associations went away. And so that's probably the best study to date that I think would provide some reassurance that um, could there be a correlation? Of course there could. There always could be some causation there. But the studies to date, I would say at this point, I would be fine with taking Tylenol in pregnancy. To the point where if my daughters were to get pregnant and they said, Dad, do you think it'd be okay for me to take colifior if you were? I would say yes. Okay. Now, things are not 100% until you have the 100% study or more studies. And I think there's recently been a Japanese study replicating the Swedish study. And so if you control for those things, and the other thing, there's something in epidemiology, something called the Hill criteria. If you don't have a randomized controlled trial, are there other things you could point to that make you more confident that this is okay? And the Swedish study actually looked into other things. One is something called the dose response. It said if women took more Tylenol versus less Tylenol, did that seem to correlate? And it didn't. So there are a lot of things that the Swedish study correlated for, and they also looked at other things too. So things like taking other pain medicines or migraines or things like that. Also it's correlated, but also went away when you did this link control. So to me, I don't think the evidence justified that announcement. I think that was driven by politics.
Well, and that's just it. In watching that presentation and watching from the White House, I don't recall having any of that mention of the studies that you in the quick couple minutes that you went through that. And so, yeah, it's been confusing for me that this obsession with HHS Secretary Kennedy with autism. I mean, he'd been talking about it through the campaign, and then gets appointed to this very important position in the United States. And it just seems to me it's kind of confusing, I guess, but not only is the result of what they're saying very confusing, but it's confusing from a political standpoint of why this is so important, why they
Yeah.
think it's that important. I mean, obviously autism and there are more and more, and I know we'll get into this, that more and more people diagnosed with this condition. And but there's reasons for that. So anyway, just your thoughts on why this, why now?
Well, why now? I think he announced that they were going to come out with a major
That's right.
announcement in 6 months. So he created a time pressure for something to come out. So they had to come up with something, and this is what they came up with. Unfortunately, it was not very well thought out. Most experts think that autism is mostly genetic with some environmental factors. And so there's also already been decades of study on this. So why they had to come up with something completely new and do their best to come up with something that was sort of half baked, I don't understand what the time pressure is though, except they created their own time pressure. And RFK has had this weird thing about autism, and he's been looking, starting with measles, and those initial studies were all withdrawn because they were falsified, for example. And so maybe he's finally moving on from the measles vaccine would be a good thing, but now he's looking for other things to try to explain an increase in autism, which is somewhat misleading to people too. That it's not that we have an epidemic of autism; it's that they've broadened the diagnosis and they're doing a better job of screening. So it's not like there's some toxin out there creating autism. There are other explanations, and I'm not sure why they aren't looking at those explanations. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and yeah, I think for most of us, I think a lot of us know people who have children or know people who are on the autism spectrum. And I think it is more talked about in our community, in our culture. And but there are, as you said, there are reasons why we're more aware of this condition.
mhm. Yeah, and then the biggest reason, one, is that they've broadened the definition. Now it's better to say autism spectrum disorder, and it's a spectrum of things. And there used to be diagnoses they called other things previously, like Asperger's, for example, or some
Yeah.
different learning disabilities. Those have now come into the broader category of autism spectrum. And so what's really happened is not that we have a huge increase in underlying problems, it's just that more people are being diagnosed, whereas in the past they were not diagnosed, or they were diagnosed as something else. And the benefit of more accurate diagnosis and screening is it leads to better treatment. So sometimes when you have more diagnoses, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's a good thing because now previously people were undiagnosed, and now they're getting hopefully better treatment. And I've kind of told you and some others previously that our Lincoln Public Schools has data that pretty much confirms this. So, for example, um, We have in our Lincoln Public Schools puts out a statistical manual that has the last 5 years of data and has been doing that for a long time.
Hmm.
And if you go to our current one, the number of kids with disabilities in Lincoln Public Schools has not gone up in 5 years significantly. However, the number of autism cases has gone up. And I'm looking at this, and I think you guys will put the link in it,
Mm-hmm.
where we went from 5 years ago, 613 kids with diagnosed with autism, now 818.
Okay.
But if you look at the other categories, things like speech and language impairments, for example, those have dropped about the same amount. So really what you're doing is you're just taking kids who used to be called speech impairment or language
Mm-hmm.
impairment or some other social
Mm-hmm.
disability or learning disability and now calling it autism spectrum disorder, which would hopefully lead to better diagnosis and treatment.
Well,
So,
yeah, I like that. That's really impressive. I didn't know that about LPS and how they track that. So, because obviously the motivation is to provide better services for these kids in our schools.
yep.
So, yeah, that's a good thing. That do other school districts, is that common through school districts, or maybe you don't know? But
I honestly haven't looked at like
yeah.
OPS or Mill. I assume they produce very similar statistics. Some of these things are required, for example, and it's part of public disclosure because you have to say exactly how many kids you have, for example. So it has everything from how many kids are of different race and ethnicities, languages. It's got the number of kids on free and reduced cost lunch, how many kids are at each school. All that stuff's in there, and it's just published every year. And so people who study schools, it's something you can draw from. So
Good. Anything else on this topic, Dr. Bob, that we're missing?
Well, one, I think the things that really bothered a lot of physicians I know is that by coming out with a press release, it provided a lot of fear and anxiety that was really unnecessary. I mean, pregnant women already have enough things to worry about without
Yeah.
this being thrown at them, and it's really a false thing. And they also didn't give them an alternative. So if you're going to say don't do this, what are you going to do? And the response was just tough it out.
Tough
which
it
is not,
out.
That's
Yeah.
not a good thing. I mean, someone's in pain or having a fever. And there's also a potential risk. And in medicine, we're always taught first do no harm. Well, an untreated fever also can harm the baby. And now you've suddenly given somebody no alternative what to do about it. Because if I can't take Tylenol, what can I take? Because we don't want them taking ibuprofen, for example. So what else are they going to do? So here it is, I'd say somewhat half baked, and on top of that, you're not giving somebody alternative. I think it also people need to be aware of autism isn't all bad. For example, I'm sure there are severe terms of autism where the kids aren't
Right.
getting it. It's very difficult, but there are milder forms. Those kids can do very well in society, and some of you, if you work in technology, you know that there's a few people on the autism spectrum that are really good at what they do.
100%. I have a good friend
Yeah.
who's a journalist, a longtime journalist here in the state, and he's on the spectrum, diagnosed later in life, and just a fascinating writer and researcher, and so yeah, I mean it's
Some of them are highly functional. Some of them make the best database administrators, for example. So
yeah.
this is not I think it painted it as if autism was all bad. And it's like, no, there are good things about it. There are things that we can accommodate. There's things that they can learn. We all have better learning strategies. That's part of the treatment is teaching both the parents and the kids how to deal with it actually and still be successful. So I wish they would have, I don't know. I wish they'd have taken a much different tact, obviously.
The one topic, the one question I wanted to ask to finish up on this topic, Bob, is and the Trump administration even approved a new treatment option that's been found to improve some autism symptoms. And have you had a chance to look into that or know anything about that?
Oh, just a little bit, but it's too early into investigational. There's one subspecific health condition where it has to do with folic acid metabolism. So it might work in this one narrow group of people, but it's still very early and way too early to recommend. And so again, like in healthcare, the adage first do no harm. You don't want to have people going for a treatment that just hasn't been well studied yet, because the history of medicine is full of things where we thought it was a good idea. It turned out we actually ended up hurting more people than we helped because it wasn't sort of ready for prime time yet. And so could this be a treatment? Yes, for a very specific subset, it could be, but it's not ready to be recommending at this point. And that frustrates a lot of us because I've been in, since medical school 30 plus years ago. How many times has this, that, or the other supplement or vitamin been the best thing we should ever take?
Yep.
And vitamin A, vitamin E, and you just see this over and over again. Suddenly everybody's taking this, and then it turns out, oh, wait a second, like high doses of vitamin A, for example, can cause kidney and liver damage. You got to be careful. And then, of course, more recently, where people recommending it for measles, and some kids were actually getting sick from taking too much vitamin A, unfortunately. And so, again, first do no harm. And I guess another thing I'd say is, I'm a physician. You shouldn't take tax or legal advice from me because that's not my area. I wouldn't take medical advice from a lawyer or politician.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, we're in a perilous point in our history on a lot of different levels, but I think for a lot of us, and certainly in your profession, this haphazard approach to science and medicine is really concerning, and there's damage being done. Last time we had you on, Dr. Bob, we obviously talked about the measles and some of the, again, false news stories and just coming out of the administration about, you know, uh, having vaccinations. And so maybe this kind of leads into the other topic I wanted to chat a little bit about. And that is, now that we're approaching the cold and flu season, there's, I think, confusion about the availability of COVID-19 vaccinations leading up to this winter season. Any update and thoughts on that topic, Bob?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, it's sad to say that at this point, the CDC and ACIP are just no longer trusted sources when it comes to recommending vaccines at this point. Some of the stuff on their websites hasn't been changed actually, so it's still last year's stuff that's still pretty accurate. So a lot of folks are sort of standing up alternative, well, not necessarily alternative, but historically, actually, the healthcare societies like the American Academy of Pediatrics used to have their own vaccination list, and they eventually put them so that the CDC and them aligned. Well, now they're having to sort of come back with their own again. So now the American Academy of Pediatrics, American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, American Academy of Family Physicians, they've all put out their recommendations, which are very consistent with each other and consistent with the evidence. And so now pretty much everybody's going to be looking to them now as opposed to the CDC, which is unfortunate. But they're all recommending that you get the flu shot and the COVID shot. So now the problem with the ACIP, though, is that controls coverage and some production issues. And so there were some delays. So I can tell you there are a lot of clinics that may not have stock this year because of the time lag. You have to order enough and you have to know that it's going to get paid for. Like, who's going to order $20,000 of inventory and be stuck with it because the insurance company's not going to pay for it? So there are some issues. So your family doctor, an internist, or pediatrician might not have the vaccine. So you may have to look at, say, like a pharmacy, for example. But most of the pharmacies are stocked and are already giving the vaccine. I actually looked today because I'll probably get my flu or COVID shot probably next week or the week after.
Yep.
And Hy-Vee, where I usually go, that it's there.
Okay.
There's some confusion about eligibility. So the CDC tried to say, oh, you can only get it if you have these high risk conditions. However, most states, including Nebraska, you don't have to have a prescription, so you can sort of check almost like on the honor system, for example. I think on IV it just says, are you eligible? And I can honestly say I'm eligible because the American Academy of Family Physicians says I'm eligible. So there you
Yeah.
go.
And are insurance companies cutting back on coverage for those vaccinations?
Not that I've heard so far. So right
Okay.
now, I know Blue Cross Blue Shield in Nebraska is covering the vaccine.
Okay.
A lot of the pharmacies will just, as long as you have your card, they'll just cover it with no cost, and so it ends up being no cost. And there's a few that even give you an incentive. They'll give you like a $50
Yes. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah. Get a
So I'd say
little
why
gift
not?
card. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So the good news for adult vaccines that's actually fairly straightforward. If your primary care doctor doesn't have it, you can usually go to your local pharmacy. I think Hy-Vee, I've heard CVS, Kohl's, Costco. So that shouldn't be too hard of an access issue because you're all getting groceries sometimes anyway. So
Yep.
so
Yep.
that should be good. Children could be a little more challenged. I know several pediatric offices have ordered it, and there are some. I think Kohl's, for example, does do some pediatric vaccines, so that could be a little bit of an issue. But for most of us, we can go to our usual pharmacy source, and we're still good.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, again, Bob, I appreciate your time. What else are you concerned about before we wrap up here and let you get on your way?
Well, it's. I hate to say it, it's measles again. So it went
Yeah.
down during the summer, as we would expect, but it's starting to go up again. And the hotbed right now is Arizona and Utah, so their numbers are going up. The question will be in the next few months, we'll get the data from all the schools about how many kids are exempting themselves, parents are exempting from measles. Are our rates going to keep dropping? And if they keep dropping, it's going to be more measles, which when you go back to pregnancy, people forget the MMR, it's mumps, measles, and rubella. And both measles and rubella are very dangerous if you get them during pregnancy. So you want to make sure that any woman who is pregnant, and you need that vaccine before you get pregnant, unfortunately. So once you're pregnant, it's a little late. So we hope that all women of childbearing age are vaccinated against those because the most common cause worldwide of birth defects is rubella. And we don't want to deal with congenital rubella syndrome again. We don't have it right now, but it could come back. And so I'm worried about all the other infections. And the other thing, back to pregnancy again, well, it's recommended that women who are pregnant get the COVID and influenza vaccine, partly because it protects them while they're pregnant, because it's dangerous to the baby for them to get it while they're pregnant. Plus, they give antibodies to the baby. So when the baby's born, they actually have some protection against influenza and COVID. And so pregnant women need to get the vaccine as well.
That's fascinating. Well, I'm just so thankful, Dr. Bob, that you're in the positions you are in this community. And any closing thoughts to parents, LPS families out there? I mean, I'm so thankful that you're where you're at for this community.
Well, the frustrating thing for us is just how much misinformation and disinformation there is on social media. And so the biggest thing, go to an accurate source. And probably the most trusted source for most people is their primary care doctor, family doctor, internist, OBGYN, pediatrician. So if in doubt, go to them and see what they think. And then there are some good public sites. So the American Academy of Pediatrics has a really good healthy children site where you can go to them. So make sure that you're getting your information from a properly vetted site. Like the American Academy of Pediatrics, for example, as opposed to social media.
I just thought about this. I mean, what is the communication like with your with LPS and your school nurses and that whole project or program? I'm just curious of how that works.
A couple things. So there are required vaccinations. Those are set by the state of Nebraska, and measles and mumps and rubella is a required vaccine by the state of Nebraska. Now, influenza and COVID are not required. However, we do encourage people to follow the recommendations, and so the school nurses are monitoring that. They'll have a report in November what our vaccination rates are.
Okay.
They can help people access vaccinations. There are some free clinics that they'll have at some of the schools, for example. And then there's other alternative sources where you can send people, like the health department, for example. If you don't have coverage for your vaccinations, Vaccines for Children will cover it. And so they will assist in helping people find the vaccines if they can't get them.
Yeah. Dr. Bob Rauner, thank you, my friend. Appreciate your work. Appreciate your leadership for health here in our community. And, unlike Joe Cantori, you're welcome here anytime, and it doesn't have to be a disaster, impending disaster to have you on the show. So we hope you'll come back.
We'll have a happy topic sometime. Yeah.
That's right. Hey, thanks, Dr. Bob, for your insights and science-based data. It's deeply appreciated. I thank you for your time and updating our audience on these important health issues for our state and for your continued good work. It's very much appreciated. Hey, thanks to the Parsons team who made this show possible. Chase Porter, our executive producer, Ike Simonis, producer and graphic design, Penology Tech Solutions for their technical help, Kim Remington, Parsons PR's director of operations. And thanks to each of you for tuning in, for all your support. It's really, really appreciated. And just a reminder, if you're not following us over on the YouTube, hop over there and hit the subscribe button and leave a comment about this show and Dr. Bob. It's where all the cool kids are hanging out, believe me. Okay, thanks for tuning in. Now go do good things. I'm Dan Parsons.